The cold in the northern territories didn't just touch your skin. It bit through to the bone, seeking the marrow. It was a living thing, a predator that hunted warmth with the same relentless efficiency as the Alpha King's war wolves. Elara huddled deeper into the thin pile of straw, her breath misting in the frigid air of the kennel. The stone walls were slick with frost, and the wind howled through the gaps in the heavy wooden slats, carrying snow that dusted the floor like crushed diamonds. It was 20 degrees below freezing outside. Inside, it wasn't much better. She wasn't supposed to be here. No human, let alone an Omega servant, was meant to set foot in the war kennels. These were the cages of monsters. The beasts kept here were not ordinary wolves. They were lichen-bred behemoths, twice the size of a natural timber wolf, bred for one purpose: to kill on command. But Luna Seraphina had been clear. "You smell like a wet dog, Elara," the Luna had said earlier that evening, wrinkling her perfect nose as she sipped wine by the roaring fire in the great hall. "It puts me off my dinner. If you insist on smelling like an animal, you should sleep with them." It hadn't mattered that Elara smelled like wet wool, because she had spent 6 hours scrubbing the castle steps in the driving snow. It hadn't mattered that she was the personal maid to the Alpha King's mate, a position that technically afforded her a warm room in the servants' quarters. When Seraphina gave an order, even a cruel one, you obeyed, or you vanished. So Elara had gathered her thin cloak, bowed her head to hide the tears stinging her eyes, and walked out into the blizzard. Now, hours later, the cold had stopped hurting. That was dangerous. Elara knew enough about hypothermia to know that when the shivering stopped, the dying began. She tried to flex her fingers, but they were stiff, clumsy things that felt like wood. A low rumble vibrated through the stone floor, deep enough to rattle her teeth. In the darkness of the kennel, 2 eyes opened. They were not the warm amber of a normal wolf, but a glowing toxic green. They hung in the shadows 7 feet off the ground. Bane, the Alpha King's personal war wolf, the creature the soldiers whispered about in the mess hall. They said Bane had torn the throats out of a dozen rogues in the last border skirmish. They said he was uncontrollable, that only King Kaelen himself could command him. Even the kennel masters threw his meat from a distance and hurried away, and Seraphina had locked Elara in his cage. "Quiet," Elara whispered, her voice cracking. I'm not a threat." The massive shadow moved. It didn't walk. It flowed, a river of muscle and midnight black fur. Bane stepped into the sliver of moonlight cutting through the slats. He was terrifying. His head was the size of her torso, his jaws strong enough to snap her thigh bone like a dry twig. He carried the scent of dried blood and old iron, the perfume of a killer. He lowered his massive head, sniffing the air near her face. His breath was hot, smelling of raw meat. Elara squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the teeth. She was too frozen to run, too tired to scream. If this was how it ended, torn apart by the king's beast, at least it would be warm. But the teeth didn't come. Instead, a rough, wet tongue scraped across her cheek. It was like being licked by sandpaper, abrasive and shocking. Elara gasped, her eyes flying open. Bane whined. It was a high, pitiful sound that had no business coming from a creature designed for slaughter. He nudged her shoulder with his wet nose, hard enough to almost knock her over. You aren't going to eat me," she whispered. Bane huffed, a sound of distinct annoyance. He circled her 3 times, his massive paws silent on the straw, crushing the frost. Then, with a heavy sigh that shook his entire frame, the great beast collapsed. He didn't lie on the other side of the cage. He flopped directly on top of her legs. The weight was immense, pinning her to the stone, but the heat was glorious. It radiated from his massive body like a furnace. Elara gasped as the feeling began to return to her toes, a sharp, stinging pain that meant she was still alive. Bane wasn't done. He curled his body around her, creating a living wall of black fur that blocked the wind. He tucked his massive head over her chest, his chin resting on her shoulder, effectively burying her in warmth. Elara lay there, stunned, staring up at the frosted ceiling. The most feared creature in the Northern Kingdom, the beast that made grown warriors wet themselves, was currently acting like an oversized puppy trying to keep its littermate warm. She buried her hands in his thick ruff, her frozen fingers finding the deep, dry heat near his skin. Bane rumbled, a purr that vibrated through her entire chest. "Thank you," she whispered into his fur. "You're a better person than she is." Bane huffed again, closing his green eyes. Safe in the embrace of the monster, Elara finally slept. The horn blast shattered the morning silence like a hammer striking glass. It was a deep, mournful sound that echoed off the mountain peaks and rolled down into the valley, shaking snow from the pine trees. Inside the castle, the sound triggered instant chaos. King Kaelen was home. He wasn't supposed to be back for another week. The war on the southern front had been brutal, a grinding campaign against rogue factions that had dragged on for 6 months. But Kaelen Valerius did not fight wars according to schedules. He fought until he won, and then he came home. The gates of the fortress groaned open, breaking the ice that had sealed them shut. A column of riders thundered into the courtyard, their armor frosted white, their horses blowing plumes of steam. At the head of the column rode the king. Kaelen was a giant of a man, broad-shouldered and grim. He dismounted before his horse had even come to a full stop, his boots crunching heavily into the snow. He wore his authority like his cloak, heavy, dark, and undeniable. His hair was black, tied back from a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and left out in the rain. A scar ran down his left cheek, a souvenir from a rogue alpha who had learned too late that you do not challenge the wolf of the north. He tossed his reins to a scrambling stable boy and swept his gaze across the courtyard. His eyes were silver, the color of a blade edge, and they missed nothing. "Alpha!" The voice was breathless. Seraphina came running down the stone steps of the keep, her velvet skirts trailing in the slush. She looked immaculate, as always. Her golden hair was braided in an elaborate crown, her cheeks flushed to becoming pink. She wore a cloak lined with snow fox fur that cost more than Elara would earn in 10 lifetimes. "My love," Seraphina cried, throwing herself at him. "We didn't expect you. The scouts said—" Kaelen caught her, but he didn't embrace her. He held her by the arms, stopping her momentum. It was a subtle rejection, but the court noticed. The court noticed everything. "The scouts were slow," Kaelen rumbled. His voice was a deep baritone, roughened by months of shouting orders over the din of battle. "The war is done." "You're hurt," Seraphina said, reaching for the bandage visible at his collar. "It's nothing." He stepped back, releasing her. He looked past her, scanning the castle walls, the servants lining up with their heads bowed, the gray sky. He frowned. "The castle smells like lavender." Seraphina smiled, preening. "I had the servants scrub the floors with oil to welcome you. I wanted everything perfect." "It smells like a brothel," Kaelen said bluntly. "I want to smell my home. I want to smell my pack." Seraphina's smile faltered, her eyes flashing with annoyance before she masked it. "Of course, my king. You must be exhausted. I've had a bath prepared in your chambers, and a feast is being—" "Where is Bane?" The question cut through her chatter. Kaelen wasn't looking at her. He was looking toward the kennel yards on the far side of the compound. The wolf?" Seraphina's voice went tight. "In the kennels, I suppose, where animals belong." Kaelen narrowed his eyes. He and Bane shared a bond that went deeper than training. Bane was his spirit kin, a primal extension of his own soul. Usually, when Kaelen returned, Bane would be howling, throwing himself against the bars, sensing his master's proximity. Today, there was silence. "He's quiet," Kaelen murmured. A spike of anxiety hit him. Had the beast been injured, sick, neglected? He turned on his heel, ignoring the open doors of the keep. "I'm going to the kennels." "Kaelen!" Seraphina hurried after him, her voice rising in panic. "Now? You haven't even washed. You haven't greeted the council. Surely the beast can wait." "No," Kaelen said, not slowing his stride. "He can't." He marched across the snowy courtyard, his crimson cloak snapping in the wind. His beta, a scarred warrior named Thorn, fell into step beside him. "The kennel master reported Bane was restless yesterday," Thorn said quietly. "Refused to eat. We thought he missed you." "He feels something," Kaelen said, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "Something wrong." They reached the kennel district. The smell of wet fur and straw hit them, a stark contrast to the perfumed air of the castle. The other werewolves began to bark and yip, sensing the alpha, but the massive central cage, Bane's cage, remained dark and silent. Kaelen strode up to the heavy iron gate. It was locked. "Open it," he commanded. The kennel master, a nervous man with missing fingers, fumbled with a ring of keys. "Sire, he's been strange. We haven't gone in since yesterday. He growls if anyone comes close." "Open it." The lock clicked. Kaelen kicked the door open and ducked inside. The interior was freezing. The heating vents had been shuttered, probably by accident or laziness. Kaelen made a mental note to strip the kennel master of his rank. It was too cold for the animals in here. "Bane?" Kaelen called softly. In the back corner, a mountain of black fur stirred. Bane lifted his massive head. His green eyes glowed in the gloom. He didn't get up. He didn't run to greet his master. Instead, he let out a low, warning rumble, a sound Kaelen had never heard directed at him. "Easy, brother," Kaelen murmured, stepping closer. "What do you have there? A bone? A kill?" He moved into the shaft of light falling from the high window. Bane shifted, uncurling slightly, and Kaelen stopped dead. Bane wasn't guarding a bone. He was curled around a person, a girl. She was tiny, curled into a fetal ball against the wolf's stomach, her hands buried deep in his fur. She was wearing a servant's dress so thin it looked like parchment, and a cloak that was little more than a rag. Her skin was blue-white, the color of skimmed milk. Frost had gathered on her eyelashes. She looked dead. For a second, Kaelen's heart stopped. He thought Bane had killed someone and was guarding the corpse, but then he saw the faint puff of mist from her parted lips. She was breathing. Barely. "What is this?" Kaelen's voice was a whisper, but it carried the weight of a landslide. He dropped to one knee. Bane watched him, tense, ready to snap. The wolf was protecting her from him. "It's all right," Kaelen told the wolf, projecting calm he didn't feel. "I see her. I won't hurt her." He reached out and touched the girl's cheek. It was like touching ice. Kaelen swore, a vile curse that made the kennel master flinch in the doorway. He stripped off his heavy fur cloak in one motion and wrapped it around the girl. He scooped her up. She weighed nothing, light as a bird skeleton, and pulled her against his chest, trying to transfer his own unnatural heat into her frozen frame. Bane stood up immediately, whining, pressing his wet nose against the girl's dangling hand. "Who put her in here?" Kaelen roared. He turned to the door, the girl cradled in his arms. The kennel master was shaking. Seraphina stood just behind him, her face pale, her hand covering her mouth. "Who put a woman in the cage with a war beast in the middle of a blizzard?" Kaelen's voice shook the snow from the roof. His silver eyes were blazing now, his wolf rising to the surface, demanding blood for this atrocity. Seraphina took a step back. "Kaelen, it was a misunderstanding. She was insubordinate. I told her to cool off. I didn't know she would." "You locked her in with Bane?" Kaelen stepped out of the cage, towering over his wife. "You put a defenseless human in with a killer?" "She's just a servant," Seraphina cried, her voice shrill. "A clumsy, smelly little thing. What does it matter?" Kaelen looked down at the girl in his arms. Her head lolled back against his shoulder. Her hair, freed from her cap, spilled down, a long, shimmering curtain of silver white. And then he smelled it. Beneath the scent of wet dog and straw and freezing cold, there was a scent. Faint, delicate, like winter rain and wild lilacs. It was the scent that had haunted his dreams for 10 years, the scent he had searched for in every court, every village, every battlefield. The scent of his mate. Kaelen's world tilted on its axis. He looked at Seraphina, the woman he had married for politics, the woman who stood there in her expensive furs sneering at a dying girl. And then he looked at the frozen bundle in his arms. "Get out of my way," Kaelen snarled. He didn't wait for an answer. He didn't wait for his guards. He strode toward the castle, Bane trotting anxiously at his heels, carrying the frozen girl as if she were the crown jewels of the north. "Kaelen, where are you going?" Seraphina screamed after him. "The council is waiting." "Let them wait," Kaelen shouted back, kicking open the doors to the great hall. "And summon the healer. If this girl dies, Seraphina, you will wish you were in that cage instead of her." The great hall was a blur of motion and noise, but Kaelen heard none of it. His entire world had narrowed to the weight of the girl in his arms and the faint, thready pulse he could feel against his chest. He bypassed the throne room, the council chambers, and the guest wing, marching straight up the spiral staircase to the royal tower. Servants scattered like startled birds as he passed. He kicked open the double doors to his private chambers, rooms no one had entered for 6 months, and strode to the massive bed that dominated the center of the room. It was piled with furs, wolf pelts, and velvet. He laid her down with a gentleness that belied his trembling hands. "Fire!" he barked at the guards who had followed him. "Build it high, now!" As the soldiers scrambled to light the hearth, Kaelen stripped off his gloves and leaned over her. In the light of the room, she looked even worse. Her lips were blue. Her skin had a translucent, waxy quality that terrified him. He knew death. He had seen it 1,000 times on the battlefield. This girl was standing on the threshold. "Don't you dare!" he whispered, brushing a strand of icy hair from her forehead. "I just found you. You don't get to leave." The healer burst in a moment later. Old Agnes was 80 years of age, stooped and blind in one eye, but she moved with the speed of a woman who had pulled pups from dying mothers. She took one look at the king hovering over a servant girl and didn't blink. "Out of the way, boy," she snapped, pushing Kaelen aside. She placed a gnarled hand on the girl's chest, closing her eyes. A faint golden light shimmered around her fingers. Old magic, the kind that didn't need spells, just intent. "Hypothermia, severe, her core is freezing solid." "Fix her," Kaelen growled. "I don't care what it costs. Use the royal reserves. Use my blood if you have to." "Your blood won't warm her, you fool. She needs heat, slow, steady heat." Agnes began stripping the damp, freezing rags from the girl's body. "And she needs skin contact, wolf heat. It's the only thing strong enough to penetrate this kind of cold without shocking her heart into stopping." Kaelen didn't hesitate. He unclasped his armor, the heavy plates clanging to the floor. He tore off his tunic, his boots, his trousers, until he was down to his linen undershirt. He climbed into the bed, pulling the furs up over them both, and gathered her small, frozen body against his own massive frame. It was agony. She was so cold it felt like hugging a glacier. His wolf roared in protest at the thermal shock, but he clamped down on the instinct to pull away. He wrapped his legs around hers, pressed her back against his chest, and buried his face in her neck, inhaling that faint, maddening scent of lilacs and winter rain. "Breathe," he commanded her, his voice vibrating against her spine. "Come back to me." For hours, that was his existence. He lay in the dark, listening to the wind howl outside, fighting a war against the cold that had seeped into her bones. He fed her his warmth, pushing his own vitality into her, willing her heart to beat stronger. Agnes stayed by the bedside, feeding the girl the spoonfuls of warm broth mixed with strengthening herbs whenever she stirred. Bane, the war-wolf, lay across the foot of the bed, a heavy anchor of heat, his green eyes watching them unblinkingly. Sometime deep in the night, the shivering started. It began as a tremor and grew into violent convulsions. She shook so hard her teeth chattered, a terrible rattling sound. Kaelen held her tighter, murmuring nonsense words, promises of safety and vengeance, until the shaking subsided into a deep, exhausted sleep. When she finally woke, the storm outside had passed. The room was dim, lit only by the dying embers of the fire. Elara opened her eyes and saw gold, not the cold glitter of coin, but the warm, rich gold of a wolf's eyes. But these weren't Bane's green eyes. These were silver gold human eyes, watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. She tried to move and realized she was pinned. A heavy arm was draped over her waist. A massive body was curled around her back. She was warm, hot, actually. Panic spiked. She scrambled backward, gasping, and nearly fell off the bed. "Easy," a deep voice rumbled. "You're safe." The man sat up. He was huge, his chest broad and scarred, his dark hair loose around his shoulders. He looked like a warrior god from the old legends, terrifying and beautiful. And she knew who he was. Every person in the kingdom knew the face of the Alpha King. Elara scrambled off the bed, tangling in the furs, and fell to her knees on the stone floor. She pressed her forehead to the cold ground, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "My king, forgive me. I don't know how I got here. I'll leave. I'll go back to the kennels. Please don't kill me." Silence stretched out, heavy and thick. "Get up." His voice wasn't angry. It was pained. Elara shakily rose to her feet, clutching the velvet sheet around her nakedness. She kept her eyes down, staring at his bare feet. "Look at me," he said. She forced her chin up. Kaelen was standing now. He towered over her, a head taller, radiating power that made the air hum. But his eyes were filled with a raw, naked vulnerability she had never seen in an alpha. "You think I would kill you?" he asked softly. "After I spent the night fighting death itself to keep you? I'm a servant, sire, and I was in your bed. You were in my bed because you were freezing to death in a cage my wife put you in." His voice hardened at the mention of Seraphina. "Do you know why Bane didn't kill you?" Elara shook her head. "I don't know. He was kind. He kept me warm." "Bane is a war beast," Kaelen said, taking a step closer. "He kills rogues for sport. He has never let a stranger touch him, let alone sleep with him. He protected you because he sensed what you are." Kaelen reached out. His hand was large, calloused, dangerous. He touched her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through her that made her knees weak. It wasn't just warmth, it was a feeling of rightness, of a key finally turning in a lock that had been rusted shut for years. "What am I?" she whispered. "You are my mate," Kaelen said. "You are the Luna of this pack, and you will never sleep in a cage again." Elara stared at him. The world seemed to spin. Mate? Her? The orphan girl who scrubbed floors? It was impossible. It was a cruel joke. "Sire, you are married to Luna Seraphina." Kaelen's expression turned to stone. "Seraphina is a political contract, a treaty signed on paper. She bears my mark, but she does not hold my soul. The bond was never completed. The moon goddess did not bless it." He stepped closer, invading her. Space, surrounding her with his scent of pine and steel. "But this pull, this is real. Do you feel it?" She did. God help her, she did. It was a magnetic force, a gravity that made her want to lean into him, to bury her face in his chest and never leave. "I feel it," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But what does it matter? Seraphina is the queen. She has the council, the army, the power. I am Tobadi." "You are everything," Kaelen vowed, "and I am going to burn down the world to prove it to you." A sharp knock at the door shattered the moment. Thorn, the beta, entered without waiting for permission. He looked grim. Alpha, the council is assembled. Seraphina has called an emergency session. She claims... He hesitated, looking at Elara with pity. She claims the servant girl used witchcraft to seduce the king and bewitch the royal beast. She's demanding a public execution for treason. Elara went pale. Witchcraft. It was the oldest accusation, the easiest way to kill a rival without a trial. Kaelen didn't rage. He didn't shout. He went very, very still. It was the stillness of a wolf before the lunge. She wants a public execution? Kaelen asked quietly. Fine. Let's give her a show. He turned to Elara. Do you trust me? I want to. Then get dressed. He gestured to a wardrobe in the corner. Not in rags, in velvet. Wear the blue silk. Wear the silver fox cloak. Wear the crown jewels if you find them. Sire, I can't... You are my mate, Kaelen said, his silver eyes blazing. Today, you walk into that hall not as a servant, but as a queen. And Seraphina is going to learn exactly what happens when you touch what belongs to the wolf. 30 minutes later, the doors to the great hall banged open. The room was packed. Every noble, every captain, every dignitary in the northern territory was there. Seraphina sat on the high throne, looking every inch the grieving, righteous queen. She wore black, a masterful touch, playing the victim of a bewitched husband. My lords, Seraphina was saying, her voice trembling theatrically, I fear for the king's mind. This girl, this creature from the gutters, has ensnared him with dark magic. She turned his own wolf against me. We must purge this evil before it destroys the pack. Is that so? Kaelen's voice cut through the hall like a whip. He strode down the center aisle. He had not dressed in court finery. He wore his battle armor, the black steel scored with claw marks. His hand rested on the pommel of his greatsword. Bane stalked at his right hand, a silent, terrifying shadow, and on his left arm walked Elara. She was terrified, but she held her head high. The blue silk gown flowed around her like water, and the silver cloak made her skin glow like moonlight. She didn't look like a servant. She looked ethereal. Seraphina stood up, her face twisting in genuine fury. You dare bring that whore in here? Guards, seize her! The royal guards shifted, unsure. They looked at their queen, then at their king, who looked ready to murder anyone who moved. They stayed put. No one touches her, Kaelen said calmly. He stopped at the foot of the dais. You speak of laws, Seraphina? Let us speak of laws. The law of the pack states that the Alpha's word is final. It also states that the penalty for harming a pack member is death. I harmed no one, Seraphina shrieked. I disciplined a lazy servant. You locked a pack member in a cage at 20 below zero, Kaelen said. That is not discipline. That is attempted murder. She is a nobody. She is my mate. The declaration rang off the stone walls. The council members gasped. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Lies, Seraphina pointed a shaking finger. He is spelled. Look at him. He rejects his lawful wife for a kitchen slut. I demand a trial. I demand the truth stone. Kaelen smiled. It was a terrible, cold smile. I was hoping you would say that. He gestured to Thorn, who stepped forward carrying a heavy iron box. He opened it, revealing a jagged, glowing crystal. The truth stone. An ancient artifact that burned those who spoke lies and glowed warm for those who spoke truth. It was rarely used because it was excruciatingly painful for the liar. If I am bewitched, Kaelen said, the stone will burn me. If she is a witch, it will burn her. But if you, Seraphina, have plotted against the pack, well... He took the stone in his bare hand. It glowed with a soft, steady white light. Truth. I claim Elara as my true mate, Kaelen said clearly. I claim that my marriage to Seraphina was a political sham, void of the bond. I claim that Seraphina attempted to murder my mate out of jealousy. The stone pulsed brighter, humming with power. The truth was absolute. Kaelen held the stone out to Elara. She hesitated, then reached out. Her small hand closed over his on the crystal. It didn't burn. It flared brilliant gold, the color of the sun. I didn't use magic, she whispered. I just wanted to be warm. See? Kaelen looked at the crowd. The stone accepts her. He turned to Seraphina. Your turn, wife. He tossed the stone. It skidded across the floor and stopped at the hem of Seraphina's dress. Pick it up, Kaelen commanded. Tell the pack you didn't know it was freezing. Tell them you didn't know Bane was dangerous. Tell them you acted for the good of the kingdom. Seraphina backed away, her eyes wide with terror. She knew. Everyone knew. If she touched that stone, it would sear the flesh from her bones. I refuse, she stammered. I am the queen. I do not submit to tests. A queen serves the truth, Kaelen said. You serve nothing but yourself. He drew his sword. The sound of steel leaving the scabbard was the only sound in the room. Seraphina of House Bane, you are stripped of your title. You are stripped of your rank. You are banished from the northern territories. He pointed the blade at the door. Run! If you are still within my borders by sunset, Bane will hunt you down. Seraphina looked at the king, then at Elara, standing beautiful and untouched in the blue silk. She looked at the court that had once fawned over her, now looking at her with disgust. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She simply turned and ran, her footsteps echoing as she fled the life she had schemed so hard to keep. Kaelen sheathed his sword. He turned to Elara, ignoring the hundreds of eyes watching them. He took her face in his hands and kissed her, a claiming kiss, fierce and possessive, right there in front of the throne. "Long live the queen!" Thorn shouted, and the roar that went up from the soldiers shook the snow from the roof once more. The transition from servant to queen was not a fairy tale. It was a trial by fire, or rather, a trial by whispers. Though the soldiers had cheered Kaelen's dramatic declaration, the nobility was less easily swayed. To them, Elara was still the girl who scrubbed the floors. They bowed when she passed, but she heard the murmurs behind her back. Gutter queen. Bewitched king. Temporary fancy. The first week was a blur of overwhelming changes. Kaelen moved her permanently into the royal suite, refusing to let her out of his sight for more than an hour. He was fiercely, almost aggressively protective. If a servant looked at her wrong, Kaelen growled. If a draft blew through the window, Kaelen was there with furs. It was intoxicating, but it was also suffocating. "You don't have to guard me while I eat porridge," Elara said one morning, sitting at the massive oak table in their private dining chamber. Bane was sleeping under the table, resting his heavy head on her feet. "I almost lost you," Kaelen rumbled, not looking up from a map of the southern borders. "I'm not taking chances. The castle is secure. Seraphina is gone." Seraphina is gone, but her allies remain. Kaelen finally looked at her, his silver eyes serious. "The Bane family is powerful. They controlled the trade routes. By banishing her, I have started a war, Elara. They will not let this insult stand." Elara set down her spoon. The guilt hit her, sharp and sudden. "You started a war for me? I would burn the world for you," he said simply. "But yes, the Vanes have already cut off grain shipments from the south. They are rallying the other noble houses, claiming I am unfit to rule because I broke a sacred marriage contract." Maybe you should take her back," Elara whispered. "For the pack." Kaelen stood up so fast his chair tipped over. He crossed the room in 2 strides, hauling her out of her seat and pulling her against his chest. "Never say that," he growled, his hands gripping her waist. "Do not insult me by suggesting I would sell my soul for grain. You are my soul, Elara. If they want war, I will give them war, but I will never give you up." He kissed her then, deep and desperate, a kiss that tasted of fear and possessiveness. Elara melted into him, her hands tangling in his hair. This was the problem. When he touched her, logic evaporated. The mate bond was a living thing, a current of electricity that hummed between them constantly. "I want to help," she said when they finally broke apart. "I can't just sit here being pampered while you fight a war I caused." "You help by staying safe. You help by letting me protect you." "I'm not a doll, Kaelen. I survived the streets. I survived your wife. I can survive politics." He sighed, resting his forehead against hers. "You have a stubborn streak." "I learned from the best." Before he could argue further, the heavy iron bells of the castle began to toll, not the rhythmic toll of the hour, but a frantic clanging alarm. "Invasion," Kaelen snapped, his demeanor shifting instantly from lover to warrior. He grabbed his sword belt. "Stay here. Lock the door. Bane, guard her." Kaelen, but he was gone, the door slamming shut behind him. Elara ran to the window. The courtyard below was chaos. The gates were under attack, not by an army, but by something worse. Rogues, hundreds of them. They swarmed the walls like black ants, their fur matted, their eyes glowing red with madness. They weren't fighting with strategy, they were fighting with suicidal frenzy. And leading them, riding a massive gray warhorse, was a man in silver armor, Lord Bane, Seraphina's father. "He brought rogues," Elara breathed, horrified. "He allied with the enemy to destroy his own king." She watched as Kaelen charged into the fray, his greatsword flashing in the winter sun. He was a whirlwind of death, cutting down rogues by the dozen. But there were too many of them. They were overwhelming the castle guards through sheer numbers. A crash echoed from the hallway, the sound of wood splintering. Elara turned, the heavy oak door to the suite buckled inward. Someone was ramming it. "Bane," she whispered. The werewolf rose from under the table. His hackles were raised, a ridge of black spikes along his spine. He let out a roar that shook the room. The door exploded inward. 3 rogues burst into the room, shifted into their wolf forms. They were huge, scarring, and reeked of rot. Behind them strode a woman in torn velvet, her face twisted with madness. Seraphina. She hadn't left the territory. She had been hiding, waiting, plotting. "Did you think I would just leave?" she shrieked, holding a jagged dagger. "Did you think I would let a gutter rat take my crown?" Bane launched himself. He hit the first rogue mid-air, his jaws clamping around its throat with a sickening crunch. He shook the beast like a rag doll and tossed it aside, dead before it hit the wall. The other two rogues lunged at Elara. She scrambled back, grabbing a heavy iron poker from the fireplace. It was a pathetic weapon against wolves, but she swung it with all her strength. It connected with the snout of the first wolf, eliciting a yelp of pain, but the creature didn't stop. It snapped its jaws, catching the fabric of her dress, dragging her down. "No!" Elara kicked out, her heel connecting with the wolf's eye. It roared and released her, but the second one was on her. Its claws raked down her arm, shredding silk and skin. Bane was there in a blur of black fur. He slammed into the attacking wolf, knocking it off her. The two beasts rolled across the floor in a ball of teeth and fury. Bane was bigger, stronger, a bred killer, but he was outnumbered. The first rogue had recovered and jumped on Bane's back, biting deep into his shoulder. Elara scrambled up. She saw Seraphina moving through the chaos, the dagger raised, her eyes fixed on Alara's chest. "Die!" Seraphina hissed. Elara didn't think. She didn't calculate. She just reacted. She threw the iron poker at Seraphina's face. It wasn't a lethal blow, but it was heavy iron. It struck Seraphina in the forehead with a dull thud. The former queen staggered back, blood pouring into her eyes, and dropped the dagger. Elara dove for the weapon. Her hand closed around the hilt just as Seraphina lunged for her. They grappled on the floor, a mess of silk and fury. Seraphina was stronger, fueled by insanity, her hands closing around Elara's throat, squeezing. Black spots danced in Elara's vision. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't scream. Suddenly, the weight was gone. Seraphina was ripped away, screaming. Kaelen stood there. He had abandoned the battle below. He had climbed the outer wall of the tower, scaling the stone like a monster, and shattered the window to get in. He held Seraphina by the back of her neck, lifting her off the ground as if she weighed nothing. His eyes were not human. They were pure, molten silver fire. "I told you," Kaelen roared, his voice vibrating the stone, "to run!" He threw her. He didn't throw her at the wall. He threw her out the shattered window. Seraphina's scream was long, fading as she plummeted toward the moat below. Silence fell over the room. Bane stood over the corpses of the two rogues, panting, blood dripping from his muzzle. He limped over to Elara and nudged her with his head, checking her. Kaelen fell to his knees beside her. He was covered in blood, rogue blood, his own blood. He looked terrified. "Elara," he choked out, pulling her into his arms. "Elara, look at me. Breathe." She gasped, air rushing into her bruised throat. I'm okay. Kaelen, the battle." "It's over," he said, burying his face in her neck. Vane saw Seraphina fall. His men surrendered. The rogues are fleeing. He held her as if he was trying to fuse her broken pieces back together. "I should never have left you. I should have stayed." "You saved the kingdom," she whispered, stroking his blood-matted hair. "And Bane saved me." Kaelen looked at the werewolf. "He gets steak tonight. All the steak." Elara managed a weak laugh, wincing as her arm throbbed. "Kaelen, I think I need a healer." He looked at her arm, at the deep claw marks weeping red. His face hardened. "Agnes is coming, but first—" He picked her up. He pissed, walked to the window, the cold wind whipping her hair. Below, the fighting had stopped. The soldiers, the vain traitors, the pack, everyone looked up at the king in the tower. "This is my queen," Kaelen bellowed, his voice carrying over the battlefield. "She fought for this pack. She bled for this home. Anyone who questions her rule answers to me." The soldiers below raised their swords. "Long live the queen! Long live Luna Elara!" It wasn't polite applause this time. It was a roar of respect. She hadn't just married the king. She had survived the war. She was one of them now. Elara rested her head on his shoulder, watching the sun break through the winter clouds. The pain was there, sharp and real, but the cold was gone. The snow had finally stopped falling, leaving the world blanketed in a pristine, heavy silence that felt like peace. 3 weeks had passed since the Battle of the Tower. The castle was still scarred. Masons were working daily to repair the shattered window and the broken gates, but the atmosphere had changed completely. The tension that had gripped the northern territories for years under Seraphina's reign had evaporated, replaced by a cautious but genuine hope. Elara sat in the window seat of the royal library, a book open on her lap, though she wasn't reading it. Her arm was still bandaged, the claw marks healing slowly but cleanly thanks to Agnes's salves. The door opened, and Kaelen entered. He wasn't wearing his armor today, nor his royal finery. He wore a simple woolen tunic and trousers, his hair loose. He looked younger like this, less like a monolith of war and more like a man. "Hiding?" he asked, a small smile touching his lips. Thinking, she corrected. He sat on the bench opposite her, his long legs stretching out until his boots touched her slippers. About Seraphina. Kaelen's smile vanished. She's gone, Elara. The fall. No one survives that. I know, I'm not afraid she'll come back. I'm thinking about why she did it, why she hated me so much. It wasn't just jealousy, was it? It was fear. She was terrified of losing her place. She was terrified of irrelevance, Kaelen said quietly. Power was the only thing she understood. When she saw that I looked at you, really looked at you, she realized power wasn't enough. He reached out and took her hand, his thumb tracing the faint blue veins of her wrist. She knew what I felt before I even admitted it to myself, the mate bond. It terrified her because it's something she could never control or buy. And you, Elara asked, are you terrified? Every day, he admitted. I look at you and I see the most fragile thing in my world. I see the target on your back. I see how easily I could lose you. He squeezed her hand. But then I remember you threw an iron poker at an assassin's face, and I feel a little better. Elara laughed. I missed, though. You hit her hard enough to buy time. That's all that matters. He stood up and pulled her gently to her feet. Come with me. There's something I want to show you. Is it another werewolf? She teased. Because Bane gets jealous if I pet other dogs. It's better than a wolf. He led her out of the library, down the winding corridors, and out into the courtyard. It was cold, but Kaelen wrapped his heavy cloak around both of them, pulling her against his side. They walked through the snow toward the kennel district. Elara stiffened. The last time she had been here? Trust me, Kaelen murmured, kissing the top of her head. They stopped in front of the central cage, Bane's cage. The iron bars were gone. The heavy gate had been removed from its hinges. The stone walls had been knocked down on one side, opening the space up to a large fenced run that connected to the forest edge. It wasn't a cage anymore. It was a den. Inside, on a pile of fresh, warm furs, lay Bane. But he wasn't alone. Curled up next to the massive black werewolf was a smaller silver-gray female wolf. She looked injured, a bandage wrapped around her hind leg, but her eyes were bright and alert. We found her in Vane's camp, Kaelen explained softly. She was a fighting dog, used for bait. Bane claimed her. Elara watched as the terrifying monster of the north gently licked the ear of the smaller wolf. The female nuzzled into his chest, letting out a contented sigh. He refused to let anyone else near her, Kaelen said. He carried her here himself. He's been bringing her his own food. He was lonely, Elara whispered. All that rage and all that violence, he was just lonely. Like his master, Kaelen said. He turned Elara to face him, his hands resting on her waist. The winter sun caught the silver in his eyes, making them shine. I rebuilt the kennels, he said. No more cages, no more cold stone floors. We're turning this into a sanctuary for the retired war beasts, a place where they can rest. He looked at her intensely. Because of you. You showed me that even monsters deserve warmth. Elara felt tears prick her eyes. Kaelen, I have a gift for you, he interrupted, reaching into his tunic. He pulled out a small velvet box. Elara's breath caught. A ring? But they were already mated. He opened it. Inside lay a necklace. It was simple silver chain holding a pendant of polished obsidian. Carved into the black stone was a tiny, delicate lilac flower. It's not a crown, Kaelen said, fastening it around her neck. The stone felt warm against her skin, humming with a faint protective magic. Crowns are heavy. Crowns are for duty. This is for Elara, just Elara. She touched the stone. It's beautiful. It is enchanted, he told her. If you are ever cold, if you are ever afraid, hold it. It will warm you. It is linked to my own heat. You will never freeze again, Elara. I swear it. She looked up at him, this giant, scarred king who had torn down his own castle to save her, who had reshaped his kingdom to be kinder because she existed. I love you, she said. It was the first time she had said the words aloud. Kaelen closed his eyes, letting out a breath that shuddered through his chest. When he opened them again, they were wet. I have loved you since the moment the snow stopped killing you, he whispered, and I will love you until the winter ends the world. He kissed her then, a slow, deep kiss that tasted of promise and peace. Around them, the castle hummed with life, servants laughing, soldiers drilling, wolves howling in the distance, not in warning, but in song. The girl who had slept in the dog kennel was gone. In her place stood a queen, wrapped in the cloak of the Alpha, warm, safe, and infinitely loved. And in the den behind them, the great black wolf rested his head on his paws and slept. His watch finally ended.